Hello, my name is Bob Stalick, and I am going to tell you about the construction of a Catapult glider today. The Catapult glider we're going to use is called the Scout. It's a kit produced by Stan Buddenbohm. This entire DVD will be funded by a grant from the National Free Flight Society Foundation, compliments of Bill Vanderbeek. My job today is to show you how to build this model, and then later on we'll show you how to trim it for good flights and for getting maxes. The Scout is an excellent beginner's event catapult glider, easy to build, and a wonderful flyer. So let's get started. When you receive the Scout kit, you'll notice that it comes with the wing, which is in 3 parts, 1, 2, 3. It has a stabilizer, it has a fin, it has a fuselage, which is marked top, and it has a weight attached to the fuselage. And there are some additional parts that come wrapped up in a piece of tape. Stan produces these kits by hand at his place of business, and each one of them is custom made but special. The plans need to be ordered separately. You can see them here, and you need a set of plans in order to build this model correctly. When you get the plans and the kit, you'll notice that the wing is pretty much formed all the way. It has the trailing edge sanded almost down to a 1/16 of an inch, and the trailing edge, or the leading edge of the wing, squared off. The only thing that needs to be trimmed down is the tip, and each tip can be sanded in order to make it flow better and be better airfoiled. So we're going to do a little bit of sanding on the tips, and then we're going to round the leading edge of the 2 wing tips and of the main panel before we glue them together. And all I'm going to do on the leading edge is slightly round it so that it's equally rounded on the bottom as it is on the top. Same with the other tip. So the main panel leading edge gets rounded over so it has a nice round leading edge. Same on the bottom. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to taper these tips so they're a little thinner. We're going to try to make them about 1/16 of an inch up to the high point, which is about here, and then we'll taper them into the leading edge, which will be a little bit thicker over here. A little bit of finish work with lighter weight sanding block, and round off both the leading edge tips, and you're pretty much finished with the 2 tips. At some point you probably should compare the 2 tips to see that you've sanded them off somewhat equally. This one looks like it has a little bit of work to do on it, so we'll continue. And that's about it. We've got the 2 wing tips and the main panel. The leading edges have been rounded on all of those, and the next step is to glue these parts together. The next step on the wing is to glue in the tip dihedral. And the plan calls for 2 1/16 inch tip dihedral. So I've cut 2 pieces of balsa wood, each of which is 2 1/16 inches high. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pin the main panel to the sheet using some model pins, and then I'm going to use some Sig-Bond cement. Now, this is actually an aliphatic resin. The aliphatic resin is very similar to what you can buy in the carpentry stores like Lowe's or Home Depot. So the kit, as you get it, already has a beveled edge to it. We are going to apply some glue to this edge. I like to rub it along the side here so that it's make sure all of the glue gets in the right spot. I hold it up with one hand like this, put a pin in with the other, like this, And then I'll put the dihedral block underneath in this fashion. So that's all there's to it for this side of the wing. Now, if you feel like you might end up knocking this off, you can actually pin through it in that fashion. It's going to stay there. You do the same thing for the other wingtip. This aliphatic resin takes about an hour to set up correctly. Stan also suggests, and I think it's as good an idea as this, to use a different type of glue. It's a cyanoacrylate, sold quite often as jet, and he uses the thick version. There's a thin and a thick, but I like to use Sig Bond. It takes longer to set up, but it's non-toxic, and you just glue it and let it set, and you're fine. The next step is the assembly of the fuselage. First thing to do is to cut off the weight, which he has just simply taped in place, because you're going to apply this later at some point. But at this point in time, you don't need that weight there. The fuselage is marked top, and it's very important that this be the top, because the bottom of the fuselage is tapered, which gives it the amount of angle that it needs in order to fly. So we're going to measure this off. You'll see that the nose of the model is 4 inches long, so we'll mark that space as 4 inches. And then there's a 3-inch wing, 3-inch wide, or the wing has a 3-inch chord. We'll mark that. So this is where the wing goes, right over where it says top. And then the distance at the end, at the back, there's a 1-inch gap at the back side of the stabilizer. And that 1-inch gap, 1 inch at the back, is your hand grip for when you move this, get ready to fly this model. What we're going to do now is we're going to taper the fuselage slightly so that it's not as thick at the back as it is right behind the wing. So we're going to use the thick sanding block, the big sanding block, and we're going to taper this back in this fashion. Just rub the sander on this a little bit more at the back than you do at the front part. Don't go beyond the mark, which is the back of the wing. Sand it down about that far, about this many strokes, and do the same thing on the opposite side. The object is to get the thickness of this tail down from about 1/8 of an inch, which is when you get it from the kit, to probably a little bit less than 3/32. The next thing you need to do is you need to round off the nose a little bit. I use the X-Acto knife to cut it slightly. This is an attempt to provide a little bit of streamlining. Probably isn't needed. For me, it's a matter of that it looks better. I then sand it rounded a little bit so that it's not blunt or as blunt. That's probably good enough for now. We'll get back to it later. Next step is to glue on the stabilizer. Now the stabilizer glues on underneath. And you'll notice that the stabilizer itself is just a sheet of 1/16 inch balsa wood. Before you glue it on, I suggest you round the leading edge just like you did on the wing. There's no need to put in an airfoil. There's just simply to get rid of the squareness of that cut. You can sand off the tips a little bit more to make them thinner. And you can sand the trailing edge a little bit more to make it a little thinner. But by and large, the stabilizer doesn't have to have much of an airfoil on a model of this type. Well, the next thing is important, and that is to find out where the center of the stabilizer is. And to do that, I'll measure it and I'll find that the stabilizer span on this is 5 1/4 inches. So that means 2 5/8 inches marks the center line. There's 2 5/8. I'll mark it. Actually, I should mark it on the bottom because that's how I'm going to glue it on. So we'll do that again. We'll try to make a straight line on it. That looks like, actually it doesn't, it looks about right. We're going to glue this, remember we're going to glue it on the bottom. And what I like to do is I like to use some other types of glue for this purpose. The reason is, quite often on catapult gliders, you need to adjust the stabilizer incidence, that is the amount of attack it has when it's flying. And quite often they're either there's too much incidence, in which case the model will not climb. And in some cases they're too little incidence, in which case the model in fact could even dive. We're going to make the stabilizer, we're going to glue it in place. We're going to try to make it so that it's fairly easy to adjust. In order to do that, I'm going to use a cement that I use called DYNO. Any type of acetate-based cement will work with that. If you have anything by like Sigment or cements of that type, use that. I've used DYNO for years and I like it. I've got my DYNO cement, comes in a green tube. That's what it looks like. I'm going to put a little bit of DYNO on the bottom of this stabilizer mount, fuselage mount. And now I'm going to put the stabilizer in place right over the glue. I'll leave an inch to make sure I've got it on the bottom, not on the top. I've done that before. Didn't want to do it for this article. Pin it in place. This glue takes a few minutes to dry. The reason to use DYNO is that when you're out on the field, DYNO cement holds pretty well, but it can be broken easily if you work on it a little bit. And by breaking it, you can put a shim, like a piece of 1/64 plywood, or maybe even the thickness of a business card slip of paper from a business card. You can put it underneath the trailing edge to give it less incidence, which means that it will not loop in the climb, or to give it a little bit more incidence, you add that shim under the leading edge. It's easier to break DYNO cement than it is, say, Sig Bond, Type Bond, or any of those kinds of glues, and particularly much easier than cyanoacrylate. So while this is drying, we want to make sure we've got it pretty even. We don't want any stab tilt in the stabilizer, so even it up with the fuselage. It appears to be pretty even. We can always reset it later if we find out that we do have some of that tilt in there. So we'll just set this aside and let it dry for a few minutes. The next step, after the stabilizer has dried and is on there pretty solid, is to glue on the fin. The fin, if you look at the plans carefully, you'll notice the fin does not glue on the very top, but instead glues on the side of the fuselage. And it also has a very small incidence wedge glued on the side of it. There's a piece of 1/32 balsa wood, and it's there to give it glide turn. So when you launch the model, this helps establish the glide. And for this task, I'm going to use ZAP Instant CYA or cyanoacrylate glue. So we mount this fin right above the stabilizer, just like it shows. Try to get it in place with vertical, and just drop a couple drops of glue along the side. to hold it in place. Get some right on that little block. Hold it for an instant and it's dry. That takes care of the tail assembly for this model. And once the wing is ready to mount, we'll go ahead and do that. What I want to show you now that we have the stabilizer and the fin glued in place, I want to show you that I try to round off the edges on the fuselage. So from the stabilizer forward, all of this area can be rounded off. The purposes of that are to reduce weight and to streamline the fuselage, which we think probably helps reduce drag. So in doing so, I just very gently sand this whole area underneath on the bottom end of the fuselage, all the way from the leading edge of the stabilizer to the nose of the model. Now you can do the same thing if you remember if you mark where the leading edge of the wing goes. You can do the top of the fuselage as well, as long as you don't go past the mark which designates the location of the wing, because that has to be as square as you can get it. So this top area is sanded off like that. It's kind of made round. So what you have is a tapered, rounded tail boom. And this part of the model is ready. We're still waiting for the wing to dry, and when it's done, we'll glue it on the top after doing a little finish sanding. After an hour or so, the wing dihedral joint should have dried, and you can do some finish sanding on it. What I like to do is I like to feel the joint where the tips and the main panel meet. Usually there's a little ridge there. I use the lightweight sandpaper, sand that ridge down so that it's smooth. Do the same thing on the opposite side. Sometimes the wing panels don't line up exactly. This one is slightly off, so I'll sand that down to make it even on the trailing edge. If it's on the leading edge, which it isn't in this case, we do the same thing. This side seems to be better. The next thing is to sand down the trailing edge so it's about 1/16 or a little bit less all the way across. In this case it's a little bit too much. I'm going to use the fine sander and I'm going to sand this trailing edge down a little bit more just so I get a better airfoil shape out of it. Now I check the leading edge to see that it's about the same roundness all the way out. Seems to be. If it isn't, you can adjust that a little bit by just doing some final sanding. Once you're satisfied that the wing is even all the way around, that you've sanded the trailing edge down until it's about 1/20th of an inch or thereabouts, the leading edge is rounded where it's supposed to be, the next step is to find the center part of the wing. So you use a ruler, measure, in this case it's exactly 6 inches, so we mark the 3-inch mark. Same with the leading edge. Mark the 3-inch mark. I always use a felt pen for this purpose. So there we have, this is the exact center of the wing. Now we're going to glue this onto the top of the fuselage between the two marks that we made earlier. And in order to do that, we would simply line up the two marks we just made on the wing so that they're centered in the fuselage. And to do this, I'm going to use thick cyanoacrylate cement or glue, because that way I can hold the wing in place and it'll dry in about 30 seconds. And that way I won't have to use the tight bond. This is called Zap-A-Gap glue, and it's a gap filling formula. Takes about 30 seconds to dry, a little bit longer to be fully cured. I just drop a bead on the fuselage right between the two marks, slide the wing in place, center it, and hold it with my fingers like this. Now in about 15 seconds this will be hard enough that I can line it up, because at the present time I don't know whether it's got stab tilt or what. When I look at the airplane, the wing and the tail should be even. The horizontal tail and the center section of the wing should be on the same plane as the rest, as each other. Now I prefer to cover or finish my models with typical model airplane dope. This is thinned out nitrate dope, and I get it, it's a SIG product. They sell it online or in the stores, and I thin it out about 50%, so it's much thinner. I know that other people use other materials to cover their models with, to finish them off with, but I prefer the old-fashioned dope. Typically what I'll do is I'll put 3 coats of dope on the wing, 2 coats on the fuselage, and the tail assembly. And then I'll finish up by putting my numbers on it and an address. So I'm going to start by just doping a wingtip, and I'll work my way down this other wing into the center. So we'll set this aside and let it dry, and I'll come back and finish the rest of the wing in a minute. Okay, so one of the things that needs to happen with the Catapult glider is you need a Catapult hook. The Catapult hook for this model, for the Scout, is a piece of 1/32 plywood, which is provided in the kit. And we hold it in place, as you'll see on the plans, right under the leading edge of the wing in this fashion. And I'm going to once again use thick CYA to do the adhesive work. Ideally, I would have put this on before I put on my first coat of dope, but in fact I forgot. So after you've completed your first coat of dope on all the surfaces, take a really worn out piece of 600 wet or dry paper, something that almost doesn't have a sandpaper feel to it at all, and very gently go over the entire model. Because what happens is when you put on your first coat of dope, it raises the wood a little bit, and it makes it really rough, and you want the wood surface to be smooth for the purposes of flying. So a very light sanding on the entire wing, on the fuselage, and on the stabilizer is important. Usually you shouldn't have to sand after the second coat, but it's a good chance to take a look at it, see maybe if you need a second sanding on that after that second coat of dope. So the one thing that I didn't mention last time was that there is a little incidence wedge that's glued on the inside of the wing on the left tip, just under here. And so it's now glued in place, and that helps keep the wing up when it's gliding, so it won't spiral in. It's a nice little addition to this model. It also will fly without that, but it might not fly, it might not glide quite as well. So I have put on now 2 coats of dope over the complete model, including the wing. I've sanded it after the first coat, and there's still a little bit of fuzziness. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use that same piece of old worn out wet or dry sandpaper. I'm going to go over the complete wing and sand it down, get the fuzziness out of it. I'll do the same thing with the stabilizer and with the fin. One of the things I like to do on my gliders is to paint them with a color that makes them visible in the air as well as on the ground. So what I've done for this project is I've obtained 2 spray cans of paint. Both of these are available from hobby shops or from stores that sell craft supplies. This is called Design Master Flat Black. It's for the underside of the wing, and this is a Pactra brand fluorescent orange car paint. The black is very good to have on the bottom of the model because when it's in the air it appears as a dark shadow, and the orange is good to have on the top part of the wing because in the grass it stands out. So I'm going to mask the airplane so that I don't paint everything that I don't want to paint. And I'll do that by using masking tape and some just regular bond paper. Whenever you spray paint, you need to do that outside, and so I didn't show how that's done on the video, but needless to say, the painting took place out of doors. So all you need to do now is pull off the masking, and there you have the wings with the black underneath. I'm going to do something similar for the top, and I'm going to paint the tips orange. So now I've spray painted the tips. Time to take the masking off, leaving this type of arrangement for you. I didn't get it quite even. I'm not sure that's important. The important thing is that when it's in the grass, one of the tips or the other will be up in the air and you can see it bright orange. I did forget to put the balance point on the model, so I'm going to do that now. It's 1 3/8 inch from the leading edge of the wing. So I'm going to put a little mark right there where that spot is, and I'm going to see where the airplane balances. Well, as expected, it's way tail heavy, and that's the reason Stan in his wisdom sends along some lead weight. So I've got this piece of lead that came with the airplane, and I'm going to mount it to the model. Now I know that this lead is going to be way too much, so I'm going to take some of it off and only glue on a part on one side. It's important that the airplane be balanced where it shows on the plan, because if it's balanced too far back, it will stall in the glide, and if it's balanced way too far forward, it will dive. And we don't want either of those to happen. So here we go. Got a little bit of lead on it, and it's still tail heavy. So we're going to put the other piece of lead on the opposite side. And it may be too much, in which case we'll use an X-Acto knife and cut off some of the lead. I put a pin in the balance point. I'm going to hang the model upside down like this and see how it balances. I've trimmed just a little bit of the lead off using the X-Acto knife, and it seems to balance just about perfectly. So at this point, we're ready to do some test flying. I wanted to tell you how I finished up the glider with a little feature that I like to use, and that is I've added some wet or dry sandpaper. This happens to be 320 grit on the tail, because when you pull back on the launcher to launch it, this gives you a little bit of additional grip, and that's something that I like. Otherwise you're going to lose your grip on the model. Also, when I got the kit from Stan, he sent along a launcher. Basically, the launcher for a Catapult glider is just a stick. It's got a slot cut in the top of it, and it's got a rubber loop, 1/4 inch rubber loop on it, which you use then when you go to launch the glider in this fashion. The second part of this DVD is aimed at tip launch glider, and I have asked once again Stan Buddenbohm if he would donate a tip launch glider kit for this project, and he did. This is a model called the DYNO-MITE. The kit includes all balsa parts, pop-up tail boom with a carbon fiber fuselage. It also has a timer installed, and it has a bag that has in it some of the small parts that are needed for the model. If you wanted to build this model, you would also need to order a set of the plans. They come extra. So the DYNO-MITE plans are 2 sheets, and the whole thing is available for you for $62, and then the plans are in addition to that. Now I've gone ahead and started the construction of this model because I wanted to get a head start on compressing the video so that it doesn't take quite so much time. What you get when you buy the kit is 2 wing blanks. They're slightly oversized. This is the wing blank for the right wing. The left wing has already been cut and shaped, and I've glued the leading edge basswood to it. But I want to show you how I do this before we get too far along. The first thing I've done is I've made a template for the DYNO-MITE wing. Now the plans show this template, show this size and shape for that wing. I've just taken a piece of manila folder and traced that wing onto this folder section, cut it out, and I've got it marked. You can see there's the high point for the airfoil. Here's the dihedral brake, and what I'm going to do here is draw this onto this piece of balsa wood. Now, I should point out to you that the balsa wood comes already shaped. The trailing edge is pretty much shaped. It needs to be thinned out a little bit more, and he has tapered the tip out here so you don't have to carve and sand quite so much out on the tip. So if I place this onto the wing in this fashion, I can draw around it and get the location for the dihedral joint and all the other things that are needed. This is a Sharpie pen, and I'll just trace around this to show you how it works. There's a notch right here. This is for the dihedral joint. There's another notch right here, which is at the high point. And you trace along in this fashion all the way out across the tip. So take this off, and here you see the various locations. This is the dihedral brake right there, and here's the center of the dihedral brake. If you read the plans carefully, you'll notice that the dihedral brake is slightly offset, and that gives it a washout effect on the tips. So the next thing to do is to figure out where the high point needs to go. The reason I'm going to mark this is because there's some sanding involved, and you need to sand up to the high point from the trailing edge, and you need to sand up to the high point from the leading edge. So here's how this all works. Here's how I do it, at least. I use the template. I line it up with the high point mark there, and also at the tip. I simply draw a line along that curve, and that's the high point for the tip. The high point for the main panel is drawn with a straight edge. I'll use this piece of plywood which comes with the kit as my straight edge, and I'll just mark it as well using the same felt pen. So that's the high point. The next step is simply to cut this outline out, and I use a sharp X-Acto knife for that purpose. I won't show you that at this point, but what I did want to show you is that once the wing panel is all cut out, this is the left half, then you need to glue on the supplied strip of basswood. This is a piece of 1/16 by approximately 3/16 thick basswood. You wet the tip. You can glue it on with CYA or Jet or any of those. I still use an aliphatic resin like Tight Bond. This is Sig Bond, and I get it nice and wet and damp, I should say, and I pin it in place. Pin the wing down, and then I pin the basswood onto the leading edge. The purpose for that is to give you a stronger, more impact resistant leading edge. Quite often these models will hit things like fence posts and the like, and that helps to keep the wing intact by absorbing that impact. So let's unpin it. See what we've got here. This has been allowed to dry for about an hour and a half, I think, something like that. And there you have it. You notice the wing this tip's been tapered so that the basswood actually extends a little bit off the side. And then what you're to do at this point is to sand it. So I'm going to show you how to shape the wing. And when I shape a wing blank, I use two different methods. One is I use a razor plane. With a razor plane I can bring off thin sheets of balsa, and I can shape it without cutting grooves or gouges in the wing itself. Then I go to 120 grit sandpaper, and then I finish it up with 220 grit. So it's the same as I've used on the Catapult glider. Now what I've done, this is the left wing, left half of the wing, and you'll notice that the high point is still pretty much all there, although most of it's gone at the tip. And if you sand it away, I would suggest you remark it, so when you're doing your work on this airfoil, you know exactly where the high point is. It's an important feature for the flight of the model. The next step, however, at this point, is to shape the leading edge. And what I've done with this wing is I have already sanded the underside of this leading edge so that it comes up more like a sharp edge, like shown on the plans. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sand the flat, which Stan describes in the plan. I just set the angle, put the wing right at the edge of the sanding board, and I just begin sanding in this fashion. And I hold the same angle all the way out to the tip. Now I can just very lightly sand off the very front of that piece of basswood. Round it slightly. And my wing is pretty much finished. I've marked this as the root so that I don't get the two wing halves mixed up. And I think I can put this aside, and we'll go on and finish up the other wing at this point in time, and I'll show you how to glue in the dihedral angles next. We're going to cut the polyhedral angle on this wing this time, and during the course of the sanding I had obliterated the marks that showed where that angle was. However, I had marked them on the bottom, so I've just transferred them over to the top now. I've got a very sharp X-Acto knife here, but I'm going to start the cutting from the leading edge back to the trailing edge. The reason is sometimes if you're not careful, you can release the glue on the leading edge strip, the basswood that you've already glued there, and it makes it a pain to glue it back in shape. So we're just going to trace along this line. It'll take a bunch of cuts before we get it. You want to make sure you're cutting as vertically as possible. And there we are. Now we have two sections this way. We're going to sand it for dihedral, and then we'll glue it together. So we're going to try to get an angle that allows this dihedral to be glued in at 3 inches, which is what the plans show. So I've got this piece of 1/8 inch balsa here I'll use as a block. But in the meantime, I've got to sand this angle in. So that's what we're going to do now. I'll just line this up. I'll be using a little block of material here to keep the wing panel at an angle. And I'll just sand downwards on this using the whiteboard, this shelving material, as my guide. This is the tip. We'll sand it. Now let's see what it looks like. Looks like I just about have it. So the next step is to glue the tip dihedral or polyhedral into each of the wing panels. Now I've shaped them, I've sanded them down so I have a good airfoil section on it. And here's how I do that. Here's how I glue them together. I use Zap-A-Gap. This is a CA. I put it on the joint. After I've pinned the main panel in place, I cover this entire area here with this cement, and I slide it in place, moving it slightly to make sure I've spread the glue out. I'll pin it, hold it so it doesn't slide away from the main panel that's pinned in place. Then I'll take my 3-inch dihedral brake measuring device, and I'll pin it in place at the tip. Now if I feel like it needs a little bit more pressure on it, maybe a pin there, hold it in place. There's a slight gap there which I will fill later with some more of this cement. We'll do the other panel in the same fashion. Hold it pretty much at the angle you think it should be. This stuff cures fairly fast, about 30 to 45 seconds is typical. And that's it. We'll come back in a few minutes and take these off, and then we'll do the main dihedral at the center section. Well, the next step after the two wing tips have been glued onto the main panels in the proper dihedral is to do the dihedral for the main panel here. The dihedral angle or the dihedral amount for the for this model is 13/16 on either side. So I've got this side already pinned in place, and it's got the appropriate amount of incidence to it. And the next one is to glue this one in place. So I've got a 13/16 inch block here. I'm going to put a liberal amount of CYA on this here, and we'll shove it in place and pin it in place. So there, make sure it's lined up at the leading edge. The trailing edge looks like it's in good shape. Put one up here as well, and we'll just let it cure for a little bit. Our next step after the wing has cured and you've removed it from the building board is to install dihedral braces. The dihedral braces are 1/32 plywood. Stan's kits include a strip of this, like this, and they're inset in each of the wing angles at the tips and also in the main panel in here. And to get them, here's what you do. This is a hacksaw blade, which happens to be exactly 1/32 of an inch thick, as all of them are, I understand. And you are going to saw a groove right through the high point of the airfoil. And what I do is I put my finger on the other side of that dihedral joint, and you can, if you saw for a while like that, you can feel the saw blade. You don't want to cut your finger, but you can feel the saw blade just starting to break the surface. And when it's done that, you're done. So you do this to the two tips, and you also do it to the main panel. Okay, so the dihedral braces are 1/32 plywood, and after you've cut the slot, like I showed you in the with the hacksaw blade, you put the 1/32 plywood in, and what I do is I draw a line so that I know approximately the size of that piece, and then with a pair of old scissors I just simply cut it out of the plywood. And the next step is simply to put a lot of thick CYA in the slot and shove the brace in place. Make sure it's in as far as it'll go. So the glue on the dihedral braces is all dried now, and so what remains left is just to smooth off the edges. So I'm going to use thick grit sandpaper and just sand these smooth with the bottom of the wing. That pretty much finishes it up. What we're going to show here is the reinforcement that's given to this model at each one of the dihedral and polyhedral joints. This is some very lightweight fiberglass cloth. You could also use model airplane silk if you wished, and it's placed over the joint both on the bottom and the top camber, and tapered out so that the points of this square are pointed span-wise. And I'm going to use Duco cement to put it on with. You can use any other kind of acetate-based cement. So we'll just put enough of it on to hold it in place, and we'll smear it with our fingers. Spread it out a little bit so that it covers the entire wing section, a little bit on the dihedral joint proper, which you can cut off afterwards. Once this has dried, a second coat is desirable to make sure that there are no loose ends. And you can use a scissors or a knife to cut off anything that hangs over. So we do this on the top and the bottom of each joint. While the wing is drying, I'm going to move ahead with the stabilizer. The stabilizer has a V shape to it, so it also has dihedral. If you look at the plans, you'll see that the V is 2 inches on a side. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this in two, and we're going to assemble it so that it has dihedral in it. And then we need to sand in the dihedral, just like we did for the wing. Actually, I think what I'm going to do, I think it looks like it's going to work. I'm going to put some, once again, this is Diap filling, thick CYA. I'll slide it up, make sure it's even fore and aft. Put a pin in place to hold it close to the leading edge. Another one close to the trailing edge. And then I'll put this in, make sure I've got my full 2-inch dihedral. That's it. The next thing we're going to tackle is the fuselage. And the fuselage comes in two parts, the front, the pod, and the boom, the back, which is a piece of carbon fiber, and it's attached to a pivot point which slides into the fuselage, giving you the dethermalizer action. This fuselage came with an installed timer. When we work around the timer, we need to make sure that we don't get anything on it, because it'll stop working. So here the fuselage comes a slightly over length, and so I've marked off the shape that I want this fuselage to be. I'm going to cut it back to this point, because according to the plans there's supposed to be a 5-inch nose moment, this distance here. So I've measured off the 5 inches, then I'm going to round off the front of the model using my trusty bandsaw. So I've cut the front of the boom off, the front of the fuselage pod off, and I've done a little bit of sanding to shape it into the shape that I find pleasing. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to glue the stabilizer onto the tail boom. The tail boom, as it comes in the kit, is slightly oversized. the plan tells you how long the tail boom is supposed to be, which on this model is 13 inches. So this distance between the pivot point and the leading edge of the stabilizer is supposed to be 13 inches. I have marked that with a little bit of white marking. And then if I put the stabilizer up here like this, I also discover that the tail boom is too long by that amount. So before I glue the stabilizer in place, I want to cut that section off. Now I've pre-marked this, so I'll cut this end of the tail boom off. So I used a razor saw to cut off the very end of this tail boom. I'm going to, with a little bit of wet or dry paper, I'm going to sand off any loose ends that might be there. It's nice and smooth now. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it in place. So what we want to do is to make sure that the stabilizer, when it's glued in place, is in the correct location. It needs to be centered on the boom with a slight bit of skew, and it needs to be so that it needs to be glued on in such a way that it's not doesn't give you unwanted stab tilt. So making the fuselage tail boom so that it is completely vertical is important. What I'm going to do now is I am going to put a drop of thick CYA at the beginning of the leading edge and also at the trailing edge. I'm going to put it in place on the tail boom like so. I'm going to hold it here. It appears as though it's in the correct location. And then I'm going to move over and double check by sighting along. And I'm finding that it's slightly tilted. I don't want that. So it appears to be correct. All I need to do now is to hold it while that CYA cures. So I'll run a bead along this joint here. Do the same on the opposite side. And we are essentially done with the stabilizer. This is the fin. As with the stabilizer, I've already put several coats of dope on here and it's ready to install. I'm going to bevel this because it fits right along here. So I'm going to bevel this joint to make sure it's going to set well. And once again, I'll use the thick CYA. Put a little on the bottom and a little on the side. Hold it in place. We want it to be vertical when the model is upside down, like this. We can check it pretty easily. Once again, it's important to hold it in place for 30 to 45 seconds until that CYA sets up. Now, this is the wing I built earlier, and I have since put fiberglass cloth on all of the wing joints, top and bottom, and I have rubbed in 2 coats of Duco cement, both the top and the bottom, and I have 4 coats of clear dope on the entire wing, top and bottom. Okay, so the next step is to glue the wing onto the fuselage. And once again, for this, I'm going to use the thick CYA I want to make sure the wing is centered. I may use a couple pins to help me out when the time comes. So this step, I put the glue in here. I'm fairly liberal with it because I want it to fill up all the gaps. Center the wing like that. I'll put a pin in the trailing edge. I'll put a pin here in the leading edge. All the way into the fuselage in that fashion. And I'll sight along the fuselage and the wing to see that I have approximately the same amount of dihedral so that the wing isn't skewed one way or the other. It appears to be correct. So I want to make sure that this pod and this wing joint, this joint here between the two, is solid. One of the ways to do that is to put a small bead of thick CYA on either side of that joint. I use a swab just to help push it in place and to wipe up the excess. I'll put some on this side as well. So we're about to put a finish coat or two on the fuselage boom. Now the wing has already been done. What I wanted to do here is to point out to you the importance of not getting any dope or any finishing material around this timer. The timer is very sensitive, and so for that reason I'm going to put some tape around it so that I don't slop any nitrate dope around it. So I'm going to do that in this fashion, and then I'm going to dope the fuselage. So I've put a couple coats of dope on this fuselage, and I'm now ready to remove the little cover I had on the timer. See that it still works? Yep, it does. And I want to install the tail boom because in a moment we're going to show you how to put the dethermalizer in place. In order to do that, we have to have the tail boom located here. So this is a little pivot pin that goes in the fuselage and allows the tail boom to pivot up into a dethermalizer position. It's got a 256 nylon bolt on it, and we're going to show you how this installs in the fuselage. Here we go. I push it into the fuselage. May need to line this up a little better in that fashion. And I use the nylon 256 bolt on the other side and hold that in place. The dethermalizer system comes in a package, and there are several things which need to happen before we do the fitting. One of them is there's a small piece of plywood that looks like this, it's triangular shape. It needs to be glued onto the wing right at the trailing edge and close to the dihedral joint. It's a reinforcement brace, so because the DT string is going to slide along this section of the wing. I'm going to put it in place also with some of this thick CYA. Put it in like that. I'm going to make sure it comes right at the trailing edge and overlaps very slightly the dihedral joint. One of the things I've done on my models, which are not specified in the plans, is to file a notch in this trailing edge brace right here, because the DT line is going to slide across the wing and go to the timer. And this makes sure that the DT line is always centered in the same place time after time, because the amount of pressure that's on the DT line will cause the timer to run slower or faster depending on the amount of pressure that's there. The next step is to take the loop on the timer spring setup and to put it over the timer barrel in this fashion. So it's not going to operate the timer, and for this purpose of installation, it's not important to do that. The next step is to run the string around the top of the wing in this fashion. Now the spring is not tight at this point. And then you need to put the string through the loop that's underneath the wing. You may not be able to see it, but there's a tiny loop right here. And this string needs to pass through that loop. Once the string passes through that loop, you then wrap it around the fuselage boom like this, and that holds the boom in place. And then this needle with the string through it, I push through the center section of the wing in this fashion. Stan suggests drilling a hole, and I think that would be fine too. I find that this system works just as well. We want to pass the needle through and then pull it tight, pull the thread or string tight. We're going to stretch out this spring so that it has some tension to it. Stan suggests, according to his list here, that the spring is stretched 2 inches. I'm going to put some CYA, this is the thick stuff again, on the string to hold it in place permanently. Now you notice that the string is in this little slot. It's also wrapped around the bottom of the fuselage, holding it in place. We have a little bit of what I call fiddly things to take care of, and one of them is the installation of what Stan calls the wire part. Comes taped to something in your kit, and what it is a rubber band hook, and this rubber band hook just sticks into the wing at the center section. It to come loose, so you put a little bit of CYA on it and let it cure for a minute. There's a kicker that's glued on the wing. It shows on the plan, and it's, if you're throwing this as a right-hander, this kicker goes on the right-hand tip of the model, so it goes in this fashion. Stan provides it as part of the kit, and all you need to do is glue it on there. It's a trimming piece. So by now this thing should be dry, and we'll see how well the DT system works as soon as I put a rubber band on it. Stan also provides a number of rubber bands with your kit. Rubber band goes on there, fastens onto the wire piece. Then all you have to do is release the line that's now around your timer barrel. So we may need another rubber band. Oh, there it goes. This may need a little bit of work, but this is how the tow line, excuse me, this is how the DT line releases and how the tail boom kicks up, and you're ready to launch that. Now, Stan's plans show that his models balance at 1 3/4 inches behind the leading edge. Now, I've marked that location here, and there are different ways to determine how you're going to find out whether that's the right spot or not, but I quite often just use a pin like that, stick in. I'll hold on to the pin and see what happens, and we know, because there's no lead weight on the front, that it's tail heavy. The next step is to find out how much lead you need in order to make it balance. Fortunately, Stan sends along a fairly sizable chunk. Okay, this is a piece of sheet lead. I've cut it so that it kind of fits the front of the fuselage. I'm going to glue it in place here using some thick CYA, and then we'll check to see how the model balances after I have this in place. Once again, I just hold this in its proper location until the glue sets up. Put the pin back in and we'll see where it balances. My hunch is it's still a little tail heavy. No, maybe not. The next step is to prepare the tip, because these are launched with a grip that's in this fashion. So the thumb goes underneath and the index finger goes in this fashion. And in order to help that grip, we glue on some rough, this happens to be 320 wet or dry sandpaper. Other people use heavier 100 or 120s or whatever. But I think for our purposes this is going to be adequate. A little bit of Duco smeared on there. Center it so that it's in place. Right about there, maybe a little closer in. I'll do the same thing on the bottom. Okay, so we now have the grips in place. The timer works. The tail pivots. I think other than doing some the usual spray painting of the tips, putting on your AMA numbers and the like, you're pretty much ready to fly this model. So here is my model. You notice it's had a little bit of battle damage. Got a chip out of the stabilizer. But this one has a little wingtip weight. And what I found when I was flying this airplane is that it didn't go into the glide as easily as I thought it should. So I added some wingtip weight in order to control the glide. Also, the weight in this model, instead of gluing it to the outside of the fuselage, I cut away part of the balsa center to the plywood fuselage and put the weight inside there. So it's a little more streamlined. And I did the same thing I showed you earlier on the catapults. I spray painted some brightness and also spray painted some black so that this model can be seen in the air and on the ground. A little bit of decoration over here just to make it distinctive. So this model is ready to fly, and the next step is to go out and try it.
Hi, my name's Tim Batiuk, and I'm going to be talking to you today about tip launch gliders. And before we get started, I would assume that by this time in the video you've seen the building portion of this by Bob Stalick, and I want to just go over a couple of building features that I believe are sort of important to these gliders in case he didn't mention it, or just to reinforce some of those things. So number one, on the tip launch glider, you will notice that right here is the front joint of the wing and the leading edge, and back here is the tail. And what we've done on this is skewed the wing to the glide side. So this wing glides right. So this joint is skewed 1/64 of an inch to the right. And the joint in the back is exactly in the middle. Now this is very, very important because it adds rudder to the airplane through the wing. And that helps the glider keep from dipping this wing when you launch. So I'm going to move it around like this and just give you a little demonstration. When you hold onto the glider to throw it, the further the glider is away from your body, the more the outer panel lifts. And this is a full meter glider, so you can see that's pretty far away from my body. When I spin and throw, this wing wants to come up, and the gliders tend to go over to the right too far. This helps that from happening. Also, to come back in and look at another view, the front, the leading edge joint of the stabilizer is in between the center and the outside of the boom, skewed to the left. That is for a right-handed person. The back joint is in the middle. So you have a little bit of wing skew, not very much, just a teeny bit off center to the glide turn side, and then you have the skew on the stabilizer to the left. Now, some people will do it all the way over to the side of the boom, but I believe that's too far. It needs to be a little less than a 1/16 of an inch, about a 1/20th of an inch, and generally what I do is put it between the center of the boom and the outside of the boom. That angle is proper. That also will help counteract the wing going up when you throw. So we also have a little bit of turn in the rudder to the right, and between the right rudder tab, the stabilizer skew, and a little bit of wing skew, you can almost be guaranteed that you're going to have a good angle on your launch. And this is what it should look like. When it leaves my hand, it should go up like this and up like this. You keep going, and it's going to come around like this and face into the wind and just go into its glide turn. And it would be pulling out right behind me. So you don't want it going straight up. You don't want it going over to the side. You want it going up, just like this wing coming up, spinning around, and going like this, and then to the turn. And these three things I just told you about building help it to do that. If for some reason you get the wing off center the wrong way, you're going to have big problems, and you're going to have to redo the whole thing. So that's some building things. Now I have my star student and national champion Sam Smetzer from the Napa Phantoms here, and he is going to help out with a little bit of the trim things that we're going to do. And my glider, by the way, has a remote dethermalizer, whereby I've got a little servo in here with a battery and a tracker, and I push the button and it does that, and it comes down. Sam's has a traditional DT that is a silly putty timer that most of you are familiar with, a badge timer, and that's what most people use on these, or they might use something that Stan Buddenbohm makes on one of his fuselages. But this is very effective also. The main advantage to the remote dethermalizer is that if you're going into the trees or some areas you don't want to be in, you can simply pop it and you don't have to worry about it. So when you're getting ready to fly these gliders, they should be, your center of gravity should be in the middle of the wing. Now it's a little windy out here, so it's kind of hard to show that, but you want it right there, right about there. That's where your center of gravity should be on the wing. 50%. Just measure the wing, and whatever 50% is, it should be right about there. Okay, and that's a good starting place. You might end up moving the CG a little forward, you might moving it a little bit back, but that's a good place to start. Also, before trimming any of these, can you unhook it? I just want to show or I can show on mine also. There is an adjustment screw right here on these fuselages. And if you turn the screw out or to the left, it adds incidence. And if you turn it in to the right, it takes incidence out. So let me explain what that is real quick. Turning the screw out makes the boom stick up more in the back. Okay? So what's happening is the boom is going in and hitting the screw and stopping, and so if you unscrew it, it's more this way, which is more up in the tail. And incidence is simply the relationship of the plane of the wing and the stabilizer. These gliders like incidence. They like to have more incidence in your traditional hand launch gliders or catapult gliders. So what I always tell people, before you take a flight, unscrew that maybe a full turn, so that when you do your first launch, it might be a little loopy, but it's not going to crash. It's safe, okay? The two things in trim that will mess you up is too much rudder turn and not enough incidence. Before you take a flight, now you've already balanced it, you've already taken the screw out a little bit to give you a little incidence. I'll give it a hard toss to the right, and what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for this airplane to come around the corner, and when it goes downwind, if the nose comes up a little bit, you have enough incidence. If it goes around the corner and the nose goes straight down, you need to unscrew the screw a little bit more. That'll save you from crashing these on the first flight. So I'll give it a little toss and see what it does. Now the nose is coming up right there, so that's safe. Okay, so we just had that test glide, and the glider pretty much did what we were hoping for. It went around on the test glide around the corner, and then as it was going downwind, the nose came up. So it's safe now for Sam to go ahead and give this a throw, and we're not going to have any issues. The other thing that I need to say is, for some reason, and nobody really knows why, I'm sure some smart person out there knows, but these gliders don't glide as tight on test glides as they do in the air. So sometimes you'll do a glide and it looks like it doesn't have a lot of turn, and then you throw it and it turns tight. So just don't put over rudder in it before you throw it, because it, you know, if you have to chase a little farther because it went straight, that's okay. That's better than turning tight and crashing. Okay, so Sam, go ahead. We're going to set a short DT on this, and Sam's going to go ahead and do a demonstration of a throw. So Sam's going to spin around and throw the glider, and it goes up in the air and transitions fairly smooth, and now it should turn right and go into its glide. Now what we're noticing with this flight is it's not turning quite enough, and so based on that lack of turn, we're going to put a little more weight on the tip, and it's not, well, it's starting to turn now actually. So it's stalling a little bit and it's not quite turning enough, but it's not far off. So we just had that flight that Sam did a tremendously nice launch on, and this glider's fairly new, so that was very safe. You'll notice that it went up a little bit steep. Sam could maybe hold on to it a little longer on his launch, but it went up like this, and the nice thing is it turned this tip up, and it came around quickly and transitioned flat on top and went into the glide. The thing that I wasn't happy with, his part was great. The glider needs a little bit of weight on the turn tip, and I'm going to put a little weight there, and it had a little bit of a stall, so I'm going to put a little bit of weight on here on the nose. Now some people might want to take incidence out because of that stall, but I would say that you always want to fly these with as much incidence as you can, and the launch was flat on top, so rather than take incidence out to correct the stall, I'm going to add nose weight. And the reasoning behind that is, the more incidence you have with a tip launch glider in general, the better you're going to thermal, the more buoyant it's going to be, the safer the glide is. So don't take incidence out unless you have to. If it's loopy on top and goes over the top and is really bad on the launch, then you can take some out. So if you're a true professional flyer, you're going to have this important nose weight on your watch like I've got. And I'm going to put a little here, and I'm going to put a little here on the bottom of the wing. Now what you can do with this when you get home, if this is the proper adjustment, you can take this off and weigh it on a scale, flatten out a piece of lead real flat, and use CA glue to glue it on the bottom of there, and that's a more permanent adjustment. But while you're trimming, the clay works great so that you can get an idea of what it looks like. So we're going to have Sam reset the DT and do his thing again with a launch and see if that corrected those glide issues. But once again, the launch part was beautiful. So I'll step away and let Sam do this, and I'll comment as he launches. Just don't set that D too long there, Sam. Okay, now you can see it's coming into the wind, and it's starting to turn to the right, and that weight is helping that we put on the tip. So he had more of a right turn on that one, and that was because we added the nose weight. I'm going to add a little bit more on there when he comes back just to bring that around a little quicker, and I might add a little bit of rudder turn to also help with that. So that launch was another good launch by Sam. And now understand, this is only the second launch on this glider. So just from the test glide, building it properly, making a few adjustments before the first throw, it's already really close to being ready to get up in a thermal. So I'm going to add a little more nose weight to it, just because of it seems to be not quite getting around in the wind. I'm going to add a little bit of weight on the tip, and I think that should probably do it. And we're going to have Sam take another throw. What I want to say about this before he does is, for those of you that are getting started in this, if you build one of these correctly, one of these tip launch gliders correctly, follow the building instructions that Bob Stalick explained, the details that I talked about in the, when I talked in the beginning, and then do the trim on the ground by test gliding it kind of hard to the right, you can get this really close to being contest ready within 5 throws. I have literally gone to contest, and on the second throw started competing in a contest. So it's all a matter of getting it right on the ground, and then it's easy from that point. So we're going to have Sam do another one with this. Don't forget and reset the DT on it so it comes down, and we'll see how that goes. And just for information for the video, Sam is a junior at Napa High School? Sophomore?
I'm a sophomore.
Sophomore at Napa High School. He is a member of the Napa Phantoms, the famous youth airplane club in Napa under the tutelage of Rocco Ferrario. Nice launch. So it's coming around, it's coming into the wind, and what we're looking for is it's not stalling now, it's penetrating with that extra nose weight. It's penetrating better, and it's going into its right turn, and now it just DT'd. But it looks like we're really close to being in trim at this point. So here we are back. Sam just retrieved the glider. Upon observing the third launch, we have the proper nose weight, the proper amount of incidence, and proper turn. This airplane is contest ready. It is ready to fly. And just to review a few things I talked about in the beginning, just make sure that you have your wing glued on a tiny bit to the direction of the turn. So if it's turning right, like this one does, if you're right-handed, the glider's going to turn right, and you should have that just a teeny bit, a 64th or a 70th of an inch to the right, and the back in the middle. Your stabilizer skew is going to be right at about a 16th of an inch, and your balance point's going to be right around 50%. You do your hard launch, test glide launch. If the nose comes up around the backside, you're okay on incidence and you're ready to throw. And all we had to do was a little bit of fine tuning. We had to add a little bit of nose weight. We had to change the rudder just a teeny bit, and we put some weight on the tip. Sometimes you have to put the weight on the tip to compensate for the extra reinforcement on the throwing side, and that's what we had to do. So this glider is not a fancy one. You can buy these for a reasonable price, and when you get out there and fly your first hand launch glider and put it in a thermal, it is just one of the coolest feelings that you could ever have, and anybody can do this. This glider is ready to go. My recommendation is, and I don't know if I'm allowed to do an advertisement here, you can cut this out if you want, but Stan Buddenbohm has excellent kits, excellent supplies, and he only sells the best designs, and he only sells the best materials, and the best instructions. So if you want to kind of have a foolproof plan to get a good starter glider, contact Stan Buddenbohm, and he will set you up with something at a reasonable cost. So we're going to talk about catapult gliders now and some of the nuances of trimming and flying catapult gliders. And as you can see, this is a lot smaller, and I think Mr. Stalick built a Scout in the building instructions, and this wing is basically a Scout wing, but he has an extra dihedral joint. The dihedral joints are a little different, and it has a dethermalizer on it, but this is very similar to the Scout that Bob Stalick used in the video. Now, I want to do a close-up on a couple of things. Unlike the tip launch glider, the wing needs to be glued on absolutely straight on the tip on the catapult glider. It needs to be centered on there very straight. The stabilizer needs to be centered on very straight, and it has to be built with a little bit of stab tilt. So this glider glides to the left. If you're a right-handed person, it's going to glide to the left. And so the stabilizer on this is up on the left side. That adds left rudder turn. You also will have a little bit of a rudder tab to the left, and the combination of the rudder tab and the stab tilt up on the left side gives you the proper amount of turn. The reason you do the stabilizer tilt in addition to the rudder turn is you don't have to use as much rudder turn when you have the stabilizer tilt, and the stabilizer tilt does not cause the glider to spin in as much as rudder turn does. If you try to have your airplane, catapult airplane, turn exclusively because of rudder turn, you're risking the possibility of spinning in a thermal, which is basically having the turn get tighter and tighter and tighter and just come in like this and spin in. So part stabilizer tilt up on the side you want to turn towards, so on this one left, and a little bit of rudder turn to the left is the ticket that you want for your turn on this. Now your balancing point is going to be further back. It's going to be about 60%, and again it's windy so it's hard to see this, but it's right about there on the wing is where your balancing point is. It's about 60% back from the front. So if this is the middle, it's behind that, and this one's balanced pretty close to proper. So just as we did on the tip launch glider, we're going to do a test glide on this airplane, and the reason we do the test glide is to make sure it has enough incidence, which means it has the tail up enough. And what that will do is that will keep it from going straight up and straight down. We want that smooth transition on top, and we just want to make sure it has enough incidence. Now the tip launch glider, we glided hard to the right because they glide right. Well, these glide left, so I'm going to try to do it hard to the left, and what we're looking for is for the glider to come around the corner like this on the test glide and have the nose up a little bit. If it comes around the corner and the nose goes down, we need to turn the incidence screw out to give it more incidence. So we'll do a test glide on this to the left. And one more thing, most people when they test glide, they just do a little light test glide. With what I'm saying is I want you to do it kind of hard so it'll go around the corner and we can see what it does. Now it's going to dip right there, and then the nose comes up. And that's perfect. So you'll notice on that test flight, the airplane went to the left, and as it came around the corner, the nose popped up once, and then it leveled off, and it popped up a second time. That assures us that we have enough incidence to go ahead and make our first launch on this airplane and have it be safe enough to transition on top. And don't be afraid if it's a little loopy and has too much incidence, because that's not going to harm your airplane. What's going to harm it is if it's so small amount of incidence that it goes straight up and straight down and crashes, and we want to avoid that because we know you spent a lot of time working on it. Okay, we're going to get ready to have Sam do a launch on this glider now. Because we glided it, it went slightly to the left, which is the proper turn, and it looked like the nose came up a little bit when we were test gliding it, so I think we've got the proper amount of incidence to make it transition on top. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to launch it. I'm just going to kind of hold it here and show what it should look like. And Sam will do something similar to this. You want to get the rubber around the front, and you hold it in your left hand. It's very important to make your left arm stiff. And you're going to put your left arm up where you want the glider to go. So I usually put my legs apart a little bit. I kind of lean back like this. I'll put the left arm up and keep it stiff, and then I'll look at the glider and the angle that the glider's on. Then I'll just pull straight back like this and let go. I'm not going to do it right now, but this is what it'll look like when he launches, something like that. Now, what I want to say is the speed that these gliders come off of this rubber is so fast that the minutest adjustment is going to be magnified. If you have a little bit too much rudder turn, or you hold it a little bit too much to the left or to the right or not up enough, it's going to be magnified. So your first couple launches, you're going to want to find what works best for this glider. This one might need a little bit more to the right. It might need a little more straight up. But what I would suggest you do as you trim these gliders, make notes. Say glider, the yellow and black one needs to be a little bit steep and to the right. I mean, I make notes on mine so I know, because they're not all exactly the same, and the speed coming out of my hand is so fast. I want to make sure I have that angle right. If I need to pick that out of the box and fly it in a contest, I want to know what this one does. So we're going to have Sam go ahead and launch this, and we'll look at his launch angle and how he holds it, and we'll see how that goes. So Sam, go ahead and set the DT and do your thing. Nice. So his launch angle was very similar to what I just talked about. The glider went up and it transitioned smooth on top, and it's going into its glide. So you can see that after just a couple of test glides and proper building and adjusting, that glider is flying well at this point. So we're back after retrieval on that last flight that Sam took, and just to reinforce on his launch, the launch angle was like this, and the glider went up slightly to the left, came around like this, the left tip came up, and it came around and came out flat on top like that, and then went into the glide. What you want on your launches, whether it's a tip launch glider or it's a catapult glider, at the top you want it flat like this and still. You don't want it like this and then taking a dip. You don't want it back here or over here. You want it as flat as possible. So when it goes up, comes around, goes like this, and comes flat and still, and then goes into the glide. That's what you're after, and it's important to work on that and make the minor adjustments of a little bit of nose weight, a little bit of incidence, more or less, and a little bit of rudder, changing those things slightly. This glider is very close to being contest ready. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in conclusion of our little lesson today on how to trim gliders is that I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I will tell you, in life there are very few things that are more enjoyable than flying small gliders. To go out on a Saturday and with 3 of these little guys that you built and put them in thermals and watch them fly around for 2 minutes and DT and come down is an incredible experience. The tip launch gliders, being able to build those and throw those, there's really no excuse. I don't care how young you are or how old you are, you can fly those gliders, and there's no more enjoyable aspect of free flight model airplanes than small glider flying. So thank you for being part of the video today, and happy thermals to all of you.